For the past several years, I had not set sight on another pair of eyes that weren't the stormy gray of mine. Had it not been for my meticulous record-keeping, perhaps I would have lost track of time a long time ago. I wonder how long it would have taken for the days to blend into weeks and the weeks into months. 2 years? 3? 5? It had in fact been 6. 6 long years since the whole world went to hell. If hell was a cluster of brilliant white tractor beams sweeping across the face of the earth from outer space. My name is Eddie Winters, and while no one may ever get to hear this, I am, as far as I know, the last surviving man on planet Earth. And this is my story. I still remember the date as clear as I would my own birthday. Even clearer still. After all, it was the last significant date in the history of humankind. I suppose that would make it the last public holiday planet Earth ever experienced. But this story would not be complete if I did not take it a few months before. It was in fact the day of my wedding anniversary, and, like the husband of the year that I was, I brought my wife the gift of bad news. The day began like any other weekday, with a 30-minute commute to my job at NASA. There was no sign whatsoever that I would discover something that would change not just my life, but that of everyone on the planet. At the time, I was part of a small group of scientists tasked with researching into the planets on the farther end of our solar system and the nature of their climates as they were affected by various factors. For this reason, and because I found it oddly comforting looking into the vast unknown, it was not uncommon for me to spend long hours on the space telescope. I liked to work alone, as I was more used to it, and other than being co-workers, I did not have much of a relationship with the people in the office. This meant that I was usually one of the last to leave work, at least in my department. When evening came, I sat, peering into deep space in the direction of the dwarf planet Pluto. It was not a part of my research, having been downgraded since 2006, but I found it fascinating, from its erratic orbit to its one moon that was about half the dwarf planet's size. If I had not been looking at Pluto at that exact moment, my story would have gone a bit differently. As I looked into the telescope, there was a sudden displacement in the vacuum of space, almost like a hole had been ripped open in the very fabric of space itself. At first I thought it was a glitch of some kind, but as I watched, something emerged. It was no bigger than a grain of sand to look at, but next to Pluto I could make out just how big this object was. And it was massive. Roughly a third of the size of Pluto's moon. As this strange object fully emerged from what I was starting to realize was in fact a wormhole, it was followed by another. When that was out, yet another followed it. As soon as the third was through the wormhole, it vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. I backed away from the telescope, and for a full minute I found myself trying and failing to process what I had just witnessed. And then it hit me. While I did not fully comprehend what I had just seen, there were a few things that were clear. First, 3 foreign unidentified bodies had just entered our solar system. And second, they had very intentionally appeared here. I had to tell someone. I rushed to my supervisor's office. Luckily, he was still around. Forgetting my manners, I barged in, startling the man who was doing something on his computer. "Have you gone mad, Eddie?" he asked. My supervisor was only a few years older than I was. He was also pretty new to the job, having been recently promoted following his predecessor's retirement. Personally, I wasn't too fond of him because he had overnight grown a massive ego, and he was a gambling addict. I had no doubt that on his screen right then and there was an ongoing game of blackjack, and he was losing. "I am so sorry, sir," I said. There's... I had not quite prepared a speech, and now I was lost. "Well," he said, "out with it. I'm in the middle of something." There's something you need to see, sir." "Well, what is it?" "The telescope, sir," I said. "I think you should see for yourself." He rolled his eyes, and I knew he was considering dismissing me, but I also knew he knew that if I reported his refusal to do his job, he would get in trouble. With a sigh, he got up from his chair and gestured for me to lead the way. I took him back to the observatory and stopped right beside the telescope. He stopped in the middle of the room and raised a brow. There was an air of self-importance around him that ticked me off, but I kept my annoyance in check as I explained. "I think it would be best if you just take a look, sir," I said. "The telescope is pointed towards Pluto." He moved up to the system and looked. I waited patiently in anticipation of some sort of startled reaction. But instead, all I got was, "What am I supposed to be looking at exactly?" he said. It's right there, sir." "Pluto?" he said. "It sure is. Don't tell me this is the first time you're seeing it." "Not the planet, sir," I said. I paused. I didn't want to say objects because he already seemed ready to leave. I had to take the risk. "The spaceships." He raised his brow so high, for a moment it got lost in his bangs. "The what?" "Spaceships, sir," I said. "You must be able to see them. They're right by Pluto's moon." He stepped back from the system, and I took a look for myself. To my equal parts horror and surprise, there was no strange object in sight. There was an abundance of reasons why I could not see them any longer, and every single one of them made me feel more and more uneasy. I looked up at my supervisor, and I could see that he was questioning both my credibility and my sanity. He didn't see the possibilities I saw. He saw a subordinate wasting his time. "They were there," I said. "I swear it. 3 of them." "So you think you managed to spot 3 so-called spaceships all the way across the solar system? Describe them to me then." "I could not do that, but I do know they were oddly shaped and they appeared to look alike." "You do know what asteroids are, correct?" "They showed up through a wormhole a few minutes ago. I don't believe asteroids behave this way." My supervisor blinked twice. "To be absolutely clear, you're talking about an alien spaceship." "I know how crazy it sounds, sir, but..." "Do you?" he said. "I'm not sure you do, because if you did, you would not be telling such atrocious lies." "I'm not!" "What? You thought this would be funny?" he said. "Last year, that goof Jimmy tried to pull a prank on the newbies about alien space signals, and you're trying to one-up him?" "It's not like that, sir." "You remember what happened to Jimmy, yes? He lost a shot at a promotion because of it." In that moment, I felt the same hate towards him as I had towards all my past bullies. The former supervisor would have listened to me no matter how ridiculous I sounded. But not him. "Go home, Eddie," he said. "And next time you see me, it better be about your research, not some silly story you're spinning." I tried to defend myself, but he gave me no chance before storming off. Left with no choice, I packed up for the next. The drive home to the suburbs was filled with looming dread of the future. My supervisor had dismissed my claims, but that did nothing to change how much I believed in what I had seen. Even my alien spaceship speculation seemed more and more real to me. Something, a host of somethings, judging from the size of those ships, had decided to visit our solar system. I had no doubt that Earth was their final destination. By the time I pulled up in front of my suburban home, I had completely forgotten the date. I was quickly reminded when I arrived at the front steps. As I struggled to fetch my keys, the door opened from within, and there was my wife, Beatrice, standing in the doorway, dressed in a sleeveless red gown. The material was sheer enough to be sexy, but stretched enough to accommodate her 6-month-old baby bump. Her face was lightly made up, too. She'd put in effort, and it paid off. With an accompanying smile that lit up her whole visage, she looked stunning. If there is anything I truly regret from before the end of the world, it was that in that moment I failed to give my wife the appreciation she deserved. "Hey, baby," I said tiredly. "Happy anniversary." I watched as her face fell, and I wanted to kick myself over and over for it.
"What's wrong?"
she said. She moved aside, and as I stepped in, she locked the door after me. Then she came to stand in front of me again. There was no rush with her. She took my coat and my backpack and ushered me into the dining room where a dinner spread awaited us. Suddenly, I hated myself even more for ruining the night. And to this day, I still do. We sat down, paying no mind to the food, which smelled great. "I guess you could say, bad day at the office," I said at last. I chuckled humorlessly. For most other professions, that would have been a casual statement, but when your job had to do with space study, it was a whole different situation. Her jaw went slack.
"How bad?"
I felt my confidence wane. Suddenly, my supervisor's words had me questioning everything I thought I was certain of. I sighed.
"Eddie, talk to me,"
she whispered. "I don't want to needlessly alarm you," I said. She reached across the table and took my hand.
"If you're already alarmed, then so am I. You might as well let me know why we're both alarmed."
"I saw something," I said, "while I was doing a study."
"I mean, it's not aliens, is it?"
she said. It was an attempt to break the ice, and she laughed, but she quickly grew silent when she saw that I didn't quite find it funny. I think it is," I said. Her face went pale.
"Well, that joke was in poor taste."
She was trying desperately to keep the mood light, but I was not a good sport. You have to remember that I am only drawing conclusions based on what I saw, and I know nothing of a certain, but I saw 3 unidentified objects enter our solar system while I was observing Pluto, I said. They looked like they could be asteroids, but they came through wormholes, and they moved in formation. I tried to show my supervisor, but by the time he got to the telescope, they were out of sight. He didn't believe me and thought I was trying to pull a prank.
"Well, you have to convince someone, right?"
she said.
"Maybe someone higher up?"
"If I pushed too hard, I could lose my job and all this could be nothing." She squeezed my hand, and I looked up to meet her eyes.
"Do you think this is nothing?"
Beatrice asked. I thought about it for a moment. Then I shook my head. "I know what I saw," I said firmly. "Those were not asteroids. The fact that they were out of sight before I could get my supervisor means they weren't moved by orbit."
"So what are you going to do?"
she asked. "If those ships are coming here, we have to be prepared for the worst," I said. "We can't tell people about it because at best that could cause a state of panic, and at worst I'll lose credibility and be branded a conspiracy theorist. In both cases, I did sign a non-disclosure agreement. I would lose my job and get sued."
"Right. Let's not do that."
She paused and thought.
"But you cannot do it alone. You have to convince someone, anyone."
I sighed. I could not disagree with her, but I did not want to face a repeat of that evening. Still, she was the one telling me to do it. "Fine," I said, "but don't hold on to any hope."
"Good,"
she said with a smile. She seemed unfazed by the news, but I knew otherwise. She could see that I was shaken, and she was trying to be the strong one. The smile was still on her face when, all of a sudden, she stood up and excused herself from the dining room. I did not hear her climbing the stairs, so I was subconsciously aware that she was in the living room, although I had no idea why. A few seconds later, music began to play from the stereos. I recognized the intro immediately. It was the same song that we had danced to at our wedding reception. She returned to the dining room and came up to me with her hand outstretched. "What are you doing?" I asked, but I did not hesitate to put my hand in hers. Rather than answer me, she pulled me up to my feet and dragged me to the living room. Just as the first of the lyrics came through the speakers, we came to a stop in the middle of the living room. She pulled me close, and although I was still unsure what was happening, my hands automatically went to her waist.
"Tomorrow will bring whatever it will bring,"
she said.
"But tonight is for you and me."
Those were words I would never forget. I wish I could have let myself be in the moment and enjoy what would have been an otherwise perfect evening. But I could not shake the looming fear that everything was about to go horribly wrong. And I was right. I went into work the next day with the intention of doing as Beatrice suggested, but something forced me to change my mind. The first sign that something had happened was that people were staring at me weird as I entered the office. It was like the first day of work all over again, with everyone looking at me like they knew something about me that I didn't know they knew. And they did. I got my answer when I stepped into my office, and one of my colleagues, his name was Dave, who worked with me on the climate study, looked up. "Well, if it isn't the boy who cried aliens on Pluto," he said. "Aliens on..." I trailed off. "How do you know about that?" "Are you kidding?" Dave chuckled. "Everyone knows." Everyone? I felt my blood run cold. That was why everyone was acting weird around on my way up. As it turned out, my supervisor had told the story in the break room before I got into the office. Whether he had spun it further into some kind of joke, which I would not put past him, or they simply thought the same way he did, I did not know, but the whole incident had turned into a source of amusement around the office. To make matters worse, someone had been at the telescope and mentioned seeing asteroids orbiting the dwarf planet. Like the rug had been swept out from under me, resulting in a faceplant, I had quickly lost all credibility within the office, and by lunchtime, I was nicknamed the boy who cried aliens. It was there that I decided, although it would be more accurate to say that the decision was made for me, that I was on my own. If I could not save everyone, then I would do everything within my power to save my family. Very quickly, I realized that it was easier said than done. On one side of the situation, there was me, a realist with little more than my sheer determination in my arsenal, and on the other side, there was a potential threat, literally like nothing we had ever faced. Alien armadas, potentially armed with weapons I could neither preempt nor counter. At first glance, it was a lost cause. But the one thing I knew for certain was that if anything was to happen to my family, it would have to get through me first. I was startled by my own strength of will, and perhaps the universe itself was too, because very quickly my will was provided away. There was no running from what was coming, but perhaps we could hide, somewhere not even extraterrestrials would ever be able to find us. Surprisingly, the location was the easiest part of my mission. As it turned out, Beatrice's uncle, Ronnie, had passed less than a year ago, having left no direct heir, and with Beatrice as his next of kin, she found herself the inheritor of a small ranch in the countryside. The ranch came with a few horses and a small head of cattle, but buildings were slowly growing uninhabitable, and the other structures like the bunkhouse and the stables were already past that. Thankfully, we had little need for any of it. As a matter of fact, the ranch itself was not the location. Rather, it was an old bunker that had been used during the Cold War, which happened to be hidden right beneath the ranch. If it wasn't already obvious, Beatrice was Uncle Ronnie's favorite out of all of his 16 nieces and nephews, and so she was the only one other than him who knew of the bunker's existence, and so she mentioned it to me. Over the following weekend, we took a drive out to the ranch to see the state of things. Beatrice took me right down to the bunker, which was right behind the main house. It was built to easily contain 100 people, with sleeping arrangements still intact. As we looked around the musty space at the cobweb-covered walls and the dusty surfaces, an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach, and suddenly, I felt a strong urge to empty my guts. I glanced over at Beatrice, expecting to find her inspecting the sleeping spaces, as she was doing last time I looked her way. But instead, she was looking right at me. Her facial expression matched the way I felt.
So this might be our new home for...
She trailed off for a moment and cleared her throat.
Forever?
We cannot let ourselves think like that, I said. I closed the distance between us and took both her hands in mine. Let's not think about it at all.
Pretty hard not to do that, considering we'll be spending the next few months working on it.
I sighed, pausing to pick my next words carefully. We are preparing ourselves for the worst, but at the same time, let's hope for the best. Yes, we'll be thinking of it, but let's not do so as if we're building a house, merely as a project.
This would be a tomb more than it would be a house,
she muttered wistfully. Beatrice, I whispered.
I know,
she said.
I'm sorry. It's just hormones all over the place.
I'm sorry.
This is not your fault,
she whispered. Maybe not. But you know what they say about ignorance, I pointed out. We could have been blissfully living our everyday life like everyone around us.
Right up to the moment it all goes tits up?
Pretty much.
I don't regret knowing, Eddie,
she said softly.
But all of this is pretty messed up timing, too.
She rubbed her belly to finish the sentence, and I understood.
What kind of world are we going to bring our child into?
I went down on one knee and planted a kiss on her stomach. I don't have all the answers, Beatrice. I swear to God I wish I did, but no matter what, we're going to be all right, I said. You and me and our daughter.
You and me and our daughter,
she repeated.
I quite like the sound of that.
Then hold on to that thought, I said. I returned to my feet and we kissed. And in that moment, I felt like I could take on anything.
So, what do you think of what we've got so far then, babe?
Beatrice said. Her tone had shifted so suddenly that for a moment I was taken aback. Our eyes met, and she smiled. I think it could actually work, I said. It's more than enough space for 3 with a proper ventilation system. If these walls aren't already lead-lined, we'll have to do something about that.
Lead-lined?
To prevent radiation and other kinds of rays that might be used for detection or destruction, I explained. We could get solar generators to generate light and maybe heat and to power all the appliances we might need. Air conditioning, electric cooker, a small fridge maybe, a television, even a PlayStation. She chuckled softly, and I felt proud that I was still able to make her laugh.
Well, what about food?
We can start on fresh produce, I said. The fridge will keep them fresh for a while. We could get meat from the animals, beef jerky, dried fish, eggs, I guess. Then there's canned stuff from the grocery stores. Then MREs. Those things last a long time, believe me. Could you calculate the rations?
I believe I could, but all those suggestions don't see us getting past 10 to 15 years, no matter how we ration. These things will eventually expire one way or the other.
I know, I said. And I did in fact think of that. And that's why we're going to have a greenhouse farm for plant-based food.
Down here?
She said. I'll make it work somehow. And it will be a lot of work, but trial here, error there, and I think I can do it. We can do it." Her face fell, but I put a finger to her chin and raised her eyes to meet mine. "We're gonna be all right," I said. "I promise you." She smiled. It did not reach her eyes, but I tried not to dwell too much on it. "Hope for the best," I said.
Plan for the worst.
She huffed. Damn straight. To say that the next few months were hectic would be to make a great understatement. Fortunately, I had saved up enough vacation days to apply for a long time away from the office. It also helped that my wife's delivery date was nearing, as I imagined that garnered me a few extra sympathy points. My supervisor seemed to find it all amusing, linking my request to the incident with the telescope. Not that he was wrong, but he granted my leave all the same. As I left his office, I could hear him chuckling to himself like it was the funniest thing. With work out of the way, our focus was put into upgrading the bunker to last us as long as possible, as well as stocking it up. We had various construction workers coming and going, but thankfully they didn't ask more than what they needed to know. Fixing up a bunker did not come cheap. It was fortunate that working as a scientist at NASA was not the worst paying job in the world, and we had a sizable amount in savings that we had been putting away for quite some time. Beatrice ran most of the numbers and did the grocery shopping, but I didn't let her do much else. With every day, I could see that she was closing in on that delivery date, and I refused to let her commit to any more stress than was absolutely necessary. The very thought of childbirth frightened and excited me in equal measure. On the one hand, I was about to be a daddy, but on the other, Beatrice's words about the kind of world we were bringing her into plagued me more and more. Still, through good days and bad, we managed to power through, with each of us holding on to the other when our own strength failed to get us through the day. Beatrice suggested we fix up the main house, or at least the bunkhouse, so we could move into the ranch, so as to cut the commute back and forth, but I immediately rejected the idea. It made sense to cut the cost and the stress of travel, but I knew living at the ranch would very quickly make it feel less like a project and throw us into the harsh reality that we were fighting hard to ignore. At the time, it was hard to rate our progress, as we had no idea how much time was left. But then we fixed the bunker up and stocked up the storage, and no alien warship darkened the skies. With a sizable hole in our bank account, a giant stockpile of less than palatable ready-to-eat meals in our bunker, and a fully functioning, self-watering greenhouse garden, I could not help the nagging feeling that surfaced, pointing out just how hilarious it would be if, after all that effort, I did turn out to be wrong. Granted, it would be a significant relief, but at the same time, the ranch was too far from our home in the city, and we would not be able to keep up with maintaining all of it. We found ourselves slowing down as we came to the end of the project, and there was still no sign of impending doom. On some days, I even caught myself anticipating it. But it did not come. Eventually, my vacation came to an end, and finding myself even more exhausted than when I left, I resumed work. Thankfully, the joke had gotten old in my absence, and while people occasionally referenced it around the office, I got less attention because of it. Ironically, that did nothing to help me feel better. I was even more unsure of myself than before I left, because now I felt like a conspiracy nut with a stocked-up bunker waiting for strange visitors from another galaxy who were here to destroy us all. I was losing faith in myself, and with Beatrice dealing with raging hormones, I could not bother her with my problems. The remainder of the work continued without my direct supervision, and every time I got a call from one of the construction workers confirming one instruction or the other, or the shipping company confirming my order of over 500 movies on Blu-ray, I found myself wincing with a hint of shame. Another month passed, and I had managed to fall back into the familiar routine of work. The uneasy feeling that came from staring out at the far reaches of the solar system had faded into a nudging sensation in the back of my mind, and I could deal with that. Back at home, Beatrice occupied herself with the final touches on the baby's room, as we were expecting her in another week. With the return to normalcy, perhaps I should have known that something was about to happen. And it did. One afternoon, I was on my way to lunch. I passed by one of the other offices in the observatory when I heard someone slam his desk.
Where the fuck is it?
A voice snapped immediately after. Curious, I stopped in my tracks. I knocked on the door and peered in. I recognized the face I met seated in front of the computer. He was an acquaintance named Chris and had been working at the observatory longer than I had. "Hey, Chris," I said. "What's wrong?"
It's just gone,
he said. I had not been expecting him to answer, and now that he had, I felt confident enough to step into the room and ask the next question. What's gone? He looked up at me, as if suddenly realizing that I was a real person and not perhaps a voice in his head. He took a deep breath and swept his hair away from his face.
Okay, listen. I've been tracking a couple of asteroids for a while now,
He said.
At first, I thought they were on a collision course with Mars, but I was wrong. They were on track to fly right past Earth in an hour or two, but a few minutes ago, they just vanished.
My heart sank so fast, I could have sworn I felt it in my gut. Nearly instantly, I broke out in cold sweat. What do you mean they vanished?
I mean that, exactly that.
He said.
One moment they were right there.
He pointed at the screen before him.
The next they were just, poof, gone.
Where, I had a knot in my stomach all of a sudden. Where did they come from?
What?
The asteroid trajectory. You've been tracking them, right?
I only discovered them when they passed Saturn, but if I had to guess, they were pulled into our solar system and made their entry somewhere near Pluto.
Do you have any imagery? I asked.
Yeah, hold on a sec.
He said. He tapped on the keyboard, and a moment later, the screen was filled with the magnified image of 3 asteroids. They looked perfectly ordinary, but not to me. It had now been 3 months since I last saw them, but I recognized the formation. I backed away so quickly I bumped into the door. He raised a quizzical brow.
You're right there?
He said. Before I could answer, one of the screens in front of him went off. Alarmed, he sat up and started tapping away again. What just happened? I asked.
Ah, shit. One of our satellites just went offline.
He said.
Must be a server issue or something.
He was barely done speaking when yet another screen went dark.
Fucking hell.
He muttered. He grabbed his phone and started to dial a number. Oh no, I muttered.
What? You know something about this?
Those... I choked on the words. Those things you've been tracking. You're not going to believe me, but they are not asteroids.
What do you mean those aren't?
I didn't wait around for him to finish the sentence. I turned and left in a hurry. In the hallway, it took all my will to keep from breaking into a full sprint as I rushed back to my office. It was happening. The thing I had feared was happening. In record time, I cleared out my desk and grabbed my backpack. On the way out, I bumped into my supervisor. "Eddie," he said, "and where do you think you're going?" "I'm going home," I said. "What do you mean you're going home?" "You should have listened to me when I said I saw something out there." He raised a brow. "This again," he said. "Are you serious?" When I didn't respond, he went on. "Eddie, have you lost your damn mind? Nothing out there is coming to get you. Jesus!" "You're right," I said. "Nothing's coming, because they're already here, and I'm not sure what we can do now." "What are you going on?" Chris emerged from his office in quite the hurry. He looked down the hall the other way and then towards where I stood with my supervisor. On sighting me, his eyes lit up and he marched over.
Okay, I'm going to need you to tell me whatever the hell it is you know right now,
he said. What is going on? My supervisor interjected before I could get a word out.
24 of our satellites have gone down within the last 2 minutes.
Chris said.
No one seems to know what's going on. No one except you.
All of a sudden, the building shuddered violently around us. After about 10 seconds, the vibration subsided, but it did not cease completely. Without stopping to think, I took off, running down the hallway as fast as my legs would carry me. I could hear their footsteps pounding close behind me as they yelled at me to slow down and explain, but there was no time. As I burst out into the open air of the parking lot, I was greeted by the sound of commotion. A handful of people were standing around in confusion, and their numbers were increasing by the second. They were looking around at each other, as if hoping to find their answers in each other's faces. I stepped out from the shade and turned my face to the sky. I was still looking when Chris and my supervisor found me. "Explanation, Eddie," my supervisor said. "Right now." I shifted my attention to him. "Now you want to listen to me?" I said. "The boy who cried aliens? This is hardly the time to be petty." "You're right," I said, "because we don't have any time left." As if on cue, there was a hum the likes of which no one had ever heard or felt. It came from the skies above us. I was not the only one who looked up this time. Every head in the parking lot turned towards the sky. It was a good thing there were so many witnesses, because I would have had no luck explaining what happened next if I alone had seen it. At first it looked like the sky itself was peeling away. It was akin to the way paper burns in flames, except the paper being burned away was the clear blue sky, and the blackened ash spreading as the flame burned was the strange sight coming into view. As the sky continued to peel away, an asteroid-looking menace manifested before our very eyes. That was some sort of cloaking mechanism, I surmised. It looked to be one of the 3 we had discovered. Just a hunk of space rock. But the show wasn't done. Suddenly, the asteroid itself began to distort, morphing its outward appearance. As it did, the rocky exterior took on a metal-like form that quickly smoothed out all around. Eventually, the shape solidified, and hovering miles above the Earth was a shape too complicated to explain. It looked like the love child of a Formula One car, a jet fighter, and a blip. Picture it however you want. Then imagine it was big enough to stretch across the horizon. And I guarantee you're not too far off from it. That's a freaking spaceship, my supervisor muttered. I had lost the will to gloat, and instead I responded with a nod.
Oh dear God,
Chris whispered. His phone began to ring, and without taking his eyes off the alien ship, he fetched it and brought it to his ears.
Tell me you're seeing this,
he said. There was a lengthy pause as he listened to whoever was on the other end talk. When he at last spoke, his voice was cracking, and I could hear the terror bleeding through.
God help us all.
He slowly lowered the phone.
2 more spaceships, exactly like this one, have been sighted,
he said.
One in Somalia, and the other in Pakistan. What are the odds that they're here on a diplomatic visit?
Considering what I know about war from history, I said, I'm going to say 0. This is an invasion. With a hiss that could be heard for miles, the lower portion of the spaceship opened. Like a swarm of bees emerging from a disturbed hive, a cluster of spacecraft, too numerous to count, flooded out. They took up formation around the mother vessel, suspended just below. From far below, they looked like insects, but I estimated that each one was the size of a private plane.
That's not looking good,
Chris said. No, it isn't, I agreed. In the distance, I could hear police sirens wailing. The sound did not come any closer, but that made no difference. The mother vessel was so big that no matter where they were, as long as they were looking up, they were seeing the same thing we were. When the last of the smaller craft took up their position in the formation, they opened up all at once, in a similar manner as the other ship. The next moment was beyond terrifying. Thousands upon thousands of metal spheres fell towards the Earth. All around the lot and on top of the buildings and even beyond the premises, the metal spheres crashed down. The nearest one to us landed about 50 meters away from where we stood. It had a diameter of about 4 feet. Instinctively, we backed away, and scarcely had we done so when the sphere opened up. Within it, there was a humanoid figure, crouched with its head to the ground. Its entire body was black and scaly. As the sphere fully opened up, it collapsed into the creature's back like some sort of carapace. I looked around and found that all of the other spheres had mimicked this one, and now there were dozens of kneeling humanoids all around the lot alone. In unison, all the aliens arose to their feet. As they did, I got a good look at them. Simply put, they looked abominable. First of all, I came to the disturbing realization that they didn't, in fact, have heads. Their upper bodies came to a climax at the neck, which was covered in gill-like slits that pulsated. They had 2 pairs of hands that ended in little nubs like those of a handicapped human. Their feet closely resembled a human's, at least more than the rest of their body parts did. But their feet lacked toes, as if they had been joined together like a shoe. While their outer bodies were black, as I had earlier thought, there were strange crevasses all over their chest, upper arms, and torso, and from these crevasses, the gills included, glowed an ominous blue. Across the parking lot, I watched as one brave, and ultimately stupid, soul approached one of the aliens. He was too far out of reach to hear what he was saying, but it involved a lot of slow hand movements. He was still in the process of speaking when, quick as a viper, the alien snatched him up by the neck and lifted him off his feet. Its nub of a hand appeared to have morphed into a prehensile limb. What I witnessed next was truly and absolutely horrifying. The alien's neck of a head opened up like a flower in bloom, and from the depths, a long, slimy tongue emerged. It latched onto his forehead, and we watched on, too petrified to react as he screamed in agony, writhing for a moment until his body went completely still. The alien let go, and the man fell to the ground, dead as a doornail. Even with what we had just witnessed, or perhaps because of it, no one moved. The strangeness only continued, however. The alien that had just murdered a man began to convulse like it was having an epileptic fit, and then it began to shapeshift. Its neck, which had returned to its previous shape, swelled into a bulbous shape that went on to take on the form of a head. When it was done, it was still as black as the rest of it, except it had now taken the exact shape of the dead man's head. Every orifice it had grown as a result glowed blue, and when it opened its new mouth, it was from an abyss of blue and black that its first words emerged.
"Good day to you, humans,"
he said in a perfectly natural voice.
"On behalf of the..."
There was a pause, and it mumbled incoherently, as if choosing a suitable word from our vocabulary.
"Empire, we hereby claim... you."
2 of its hands morphed into blades, and the other 2 morphed into something I could not quite make out. not until it stretched out its hand and a beam of blue light shot forward, burning a hole right through a man who had started to run.
"Do not resist,"
it said.
"There is no escape."
The parking lot exploded with screams. The other aliens mimicked the one who had spoken and summoned their weapons. Everyone fled the scene as the aliens began to fire with reckless abandon. Paying no mind to where Chris or my supervisor went, I ran for my car parked not too far from where I stood. Nothing else mattered to me other than getting Beatrice and getting her to safety. Staying low, I made it safely. Reaching into the glove compartment, I found a handgun I had stashed. The sight of it comforted me slightly, but I had to hear her voice. From behind the wheel, I saw a beam of white light shoot down from the skies. It covered my supervisor, and I watched as his body seemingly disintegrated, rising through the beam as it did. More of these beams appeared all around, and more people were snatched up. Urgently, I plugged in my phone and asked my phone's assistant to phone my wife. As the phone began to ring, I stuck the key in the ignition and turned it. The car roared to life, and I put the car in reverse and floored the pedal. I backed into one of the aliens, and it rolled over, landing on the hood of my car. Before I could shift into drive, it raised its head and looked at me. I saw its hand immediately rise towards me. It was fast. I was faster. I snatched up the gun and, taking aim, I somehow managed to think up a quick prayer that my bullets would actually do damage, unlike every sci-fi movie ever, as I squeezed the trigger. I fired thrice through the windshield, and bluish, black alien blood and brain matter exploded all over my hood. Wasting no time, I put the car in drive and accelerated. The alien rolled off the car, smearing its goo across the windshield as it went. The call attempt disconnected me as I made it out of the premises. Beatrice was not picking up. My heart went into a flurry as I hit redial and put my foot all the way down. In a manner I would never have imagined myself doing, I weaved through traffic like a maniac. Energy beams whizzed left and right all around me, but I kept my head down and stayed on course. Much to my relief, there was a little click through the speakers, followed by Beatrice's voice.
"Hey, baby,"
she said.
"Everything all right?"
She sounded calm. "Where are you?" I asked.
"I was out in the garden earlier, but I'm just out of the shower,"
she said.
"The cherry tomatoes are very ripe, and I was thinking for dinner I could..."
"Forget the tomatoes and forget dinner." I said, "Get ready and grab the bag."
"The bag?"
she said. "Yes, babe. Do it now."
"My God, it's happening."
"It is," I said. "They're taking the city, and by night they will be moving out towards the suburbs. I've got alien blood on my car as we speak."
"What? Are you okay?"
"Fine. I'm fine. I'll tell you everything when I get there. For now, just move." I ended the call and focused on driving. 5 minutes later, the phone rang. My first thought was to ignore whoever it was, but fearing that it might be Beatrice, I blindly hit receive.
"Baby!"
It was she. Her voice was a stark contrast from a few minutes ago. She was palpably terrified. "Yeah, I'm almost home," I said.
"We have a problem,"
she said. "I'm sure whatever it is, it can wait."
"Oh, I am very sure it can't."
She laughed nervously.
"My water just broke."
In an instant, my arms were riddled with goosebumps. Oh no.
"Yeah, that's exactly what I thought.
Right now?
I didn't choose this, you know."
I know, I said. "I'm sorry."
"We have to get to the hospital."
"We can't afford to," I said. "The city is overrun with aliens and they're either killing or abducting."
"Well, I am about to go into labor, Eddie."
"We'll have to take care of that ourselves."
"What the hell does that mean?"
I did not bother to answer as I turned off the road and into our neighborhood. Beatrice was waiting by the door with a carry-on bag as I pulled up beside the house. She was staring at the horizon in the direction I was coming from, and I knew she could see the mothership in the distance. Her eyes widened in further horror as she took in the bullet holes in the windshield and the strange liquid running down the glass. "Hey, baby," I said. I wasn't sure if she heard me because her eyes remained on the windshield as she got into the car. I let her be for a moment as I drove on. She took out her phone, and I wasn't sure why, until the sound of screams started to play through her speaker. People were already uploading footage of the invasion on YouTube. She watched with her hand over her mouth, muffling the tears she could not let herself shed. It was a full 5 minutes before she spoke.
Oh no. I'm scared, Eddie.
She said.
I know we planned for this and all, but...
It's okay to be scared, I said. You'd have to be mental not to be.
You don't seem scared.
She pointed out.
You shot at the thing.
She waved her hand wildly at the blood smear. Killed it, actually, I said. But yes, I am scared. I'm terrified, in fact. Unfortunately, I cannot afford to show it right now. If we are to survive, one of us has to keep their head on straight while the other panics, so this is my turn. We just have to stick to the plan and we'll be all right.
The plan did not involve going into labor at the worst possible time,
she pointed out. That is true, I admitted. How far apart are your contractions? She glanced at her watch, but did not answer for another minute, and when she did, it was with a wince, cursing under her breath.
8 minutes?
She said. We're going to make it to the ranch, I said.
And then what?
I think that's pretty obvious. We're going to have to deliver this baby ourselves.
I do not like the sound of that.
Relax. I read a book or two.
I should relax because you read a book?
She deadpanned. A book or two, I corrected.
That doesn't make this any better.
She snapped. I know. I'm working with what we've got, okay? In truth, I had done a lot more than reading a book or two. I had read 4 books, and on top of that, I had watched a couple of birthing videos. Our current predicament was a fear that had lived a long time in my mind. I stretched out my hand, and she took it in hers. I love you, Bee, I said.
And I love you, Eddie.
Everything's gonna be all right.
Promise?
I pulled away until we were linked only by our pinkies. Promise. It was nearly a half hour before the ranch came into view. By this time, Beatrice's contractions were already less than 5 minutes apart. She was holding onto the car door handle so tight that her knuckles had lost color. With nothing but dirt road ahead of me, I paid no mind to speed limits or safety, not slowing down or stopping even as we came up to the wooden gate. The gate exploded inward as we tore right through. Only when we were past it and nearing the tree front of the house did I slam on the brakes. The car came to a stop inches away from a collision with the building, but I didn't stop to think too much about it. I rushed over to Beatrice's side and helped her out, and then I carried her the rest of the way. In the far distance, I could make out the tiny forms of the spacecraft, like a horde of locusts migrating to the next cornfield. We went down to the bunker and I locked the doors up behind us. There was no time to stop and process that this was perhaps the last time we would see the direct sunlight for a long time, or even forever. Beatrice was in pain, and bringing an end to that was my primary concern, not to mention with every second that passed, the baby's life was more in danger. The bed was positioned against the wall and did not give the maneuvering space I needed, so I spread a sheet on the floor and laid her down on it with a pillow to support her head and her legs propped up and spread wide apart. I washed my hands at the sink and came to kneel between her legs. Taking a moment, I summoned all the knowledge I had gathered on the topic. Only one of us needed to be caught with our pants down. All right, baby, I said. I need you to stay with me, okay? Deep breaths. She nodded. Her face was beet red and her eyes were distant. You take deep breaths as the contractions build and push at the peak, I said. You can exhale as you push, or you can hold your breath. Just see what works for you. Remember that. She nodded again. I noticed that she was moving her hands a lot, so I grabbed it. Automatically, she squeezed tight. When her breathing came in shorter gaps, I knew she was nearing a contraction. Okay, baby, I said. I'm right here with you. Squeeze as tight as you need to. She let out a guttural cry, and her grip tightened so much at a point I feared my wrist would snap clean off. A minute passed before she relaxed again. I checked for a crowning, but the baby was not in sight just yet. I slapped her inner thighs to keep her conscious. "Come on," I said, "stay with me. You and me, remember?" She did not nod, but she met my gaze for a brief moment. A second time she pushed, but the baby was yet to come forth. It was at the third that the baby's head finally peeked through, and on the fourth push the baby's head fully emerged. Just as I had learned, I gently helped it along, and with a last sigh, Beatrice collapsed in a sweaty heap, her eyes closing before her head even touched the pillow. All of a sudden, the enclosed space was filled with the sound of a crying baby. The feeling was surreal as I held the pink, chubby, living mound of flesh in my hands. This was my daughter. Our daughter. Still floundering in the strange feeling, I moved on to the task of cutting the umbilical cord. Then I wrapped her up. When Beatrice's eyes opened again, I propped her up on 2 more pillows and held our baby up to her. Her eyes lit up in a way that I knew in that moment I would never forget as she took the little girl into her arms. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes, but there was the biggest smile on her lips.
It's our baby.
She muttered dreamily.
Our little Willow.
Her head began to droop soon after, so I kissed her forehead and eased her back down to rest. She was out of it soon after, so I let her be while I prepared to sponge bath the baby, as I had seen in the instructions. I set her down on a pile of soft cloths we had stocked up on as I boiled the water. Perhaps, if I had not been so distracted, I would have noticed that something was wrong. By the time I did realize it, it was far too late. It turned out that she had ruptured a blood vessel, and at that moment, she was bleeding to death. This part of my story I would like to keep to myself. All I will say is she closed her eyes and she would never again open them. Postpartum hemorrhage, the book called it. Frankly, there was little I could have done. Not that I've managed to convince myself entirely of that. Outside the bunker, the world was burning, but it mattered little to me. Because there, in the bunker, I had just lost the one part of it that made the rest of it worth anything. The greenhouse made for a perfect resting place, and 6 years later, a beautiful dandelion grew in honor of her. Later in the day, I would turn on the television, and I found out that that same day, more than half of America was lost to the aliens. Those who weren't killed were never seen again, so perhaps it would have been better to die and get it over with. Around the world, other countries fared worse against the invasion. In a week, Africa was reduced to population 0. In a year, the rest of the world followed. And now, other than the remnants of the alien race that had stayed behind for whatever reason, I was living, undiscovered, in a ghost town, in a ghost country, on a ghost planet. On that sad note, I suppose I would say my story ends, except I'm still here, alive with none but one reason to face each new day, and even as I end this recording, I watch her lying in her bed, her eyes, an exact replica of mine, hidden away from the world in slumber. Down in the bunker, the days are all the same. The mornings are spent on chores and breakfast. The noons are spent with my daughter playing games or watching old movies, which have yet to lose their taste in her eyes. The evenings mean the most to me, because then Willow asks for a story, which is a disguised request to tell her about the world I used to live in, and about the mother she will never know. The stories, more often than not, drag on longer than intended, and for as long as she's awake, she listens with childlike wonder. It is not a lot compared to what passed for entertainment in the past, but it means more to me than I could ever put into words. While I very often long for the world outside, Willow is yet to share my sentiment. Perhaps it is because the bunker is all she has ever known, or because I have overemphasized the dangers of the outside world. But here in our little space, with the little we have, she is content. Just the two of us, the last of the human race, the last of our kind. I cannot say how long these moments will last. Perhaps even in this little bunker, I will one day lose my daughter to the detachment of teenagerhood, but until that happens, I cherish the moment while it is here. If there is one thing I have been forced to learn since coming down to the bunker, it is to slow down and appreciate the moment. And my 6-year-old daughter has been a wonderful teacher. But beyond the bedtime story, there is one last thing I do before I myself finally turn in for the night. I have this little radio, you see. It's a dingy old thing, but with the television and the internet gone for good, the radio is the only hope I have of contacting the outside world to know if perhaps anyone survived the end of days. For years I have held out hope, and every night I search every available frequency in hopes of finding some glimmer. At first, the radios picked up signals non-stop when people were trying to coordinate attacks, throwing underhanded weapons against aliens, but slowly yet surely, the voices went quiet, one after the other, until less than a year later, they were all gone. In all the 5 years since the world grew quiet, not once have I picked up as much as a whisper. It is the 1st of January in the year 2029, and for the first time, as I tune the radio, a voice comes through. It is muffled by static at first, but that is enough to spark a fire I had not known still existed. A yearning to see another familiar face.
Hello?
The voice says. It is a woman.
Is anyone out there? Hello, if you're out there, please help. We need your help.
My breath hitches in my throat, and my vision is blurred by sudden tears. We. Hey, sci-fi horror fans. It's Thomas. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Thank you to all our official supporters of the channel. Craving another scary story? Click on that video on your screen. Until next time, everyone. And remember, stay cosmic.